At the corner of 46th Street and Broadway, inside the yellow halo of a streetcar lamp, a man lay motionless. New York City, the night of April 26th to 27th, 1871. Beside him was a heavy iron hook, the kind conductors use to couple horse-drawn streetcars. That night, it had become the instrument of a fatal assault. The man was Avery Putnam, a respected merchant from Pearl Street, a devoted husband and father with no known enemies. He had been escorting two women home. The person responsible was William Foster. He struck from behind, dropped the hook, and disappeared into the darkness. New York erupted. Newspapers ran dramatic headlines. Citizens demanded accountability. No one yet realized the case would stretch on for nearly 2 years. In time, public discussion would move beyond the violent act itself and focus on something far more complex: the authority of the state to impose the ultimate punishment, the influence of money on testimony, and the fragile line between mercy and impunity. To understand what happened that night, we must step back several hours. Putnam closed his office and called on an old acquaintance, Madame Duval, who lived on Broadway. Over tea, they discussed her elder daughter, Anna Lily, who was singing that evening at the Church of the Advent on 46th Street. Madame Duval and her younger daughter, 16-year-old Jenny, planned to meet her afterward. Putnam offered to escort them. They accepted, and the three boarded a northbound horse car on Broadway. The ride was uneventful until they passed the Gilsey House at 29th Street. Putnam pointed out the ornate clock on its facade. Jenny leaned slightly to see it through the glass door at the front of the car. That small gesture set everything in motion. The driver, standing outside on the front platform, noticed the girl and nudged the man beside him. The man turned and pressed his face against the glass, grinning directly at Jenny in a brazen, uncomfortable way. It was William Foster. He had been drinking since morning. Recently dismissed from his job as a conductor for the same streetcar company, Foster was unemployed, short of money, and visibly resentful. He had spent the day drinking. Now he stood staring at a teenage girl in a way that could not be ignored. Madame Duval closed the door. Foster reopened it and stepped inside, his eyes still fixed on Jenny. Putnam rose and went out to the front platform, closing the door behind him. He spoke quietly and politely, without threats or raised voice. He explained that the young lady was unwell and asked Foster to leave them alone. It proved to be a mistake. Putnam had done nothing wrong, but Foster interpreted courtesy as weakness. He forced his way back into the car and attempted to sit beside Jenny. Madame Duval immediately shielded her daughter with her body. The three exchanged glances. He was drunk. Better not provoke him. They chose to ignore him. Foster persisted. "Going far?" he asked. Silence. He asked again and again. Then he leaned back and said in a hard voice, "All right, I'm going as far as you are. Before you get off, you'll regret it." He returned to the front platform. Silence settled over the car. The streetcar reached 46th Street. Madame Duval requested a stop. All three exited through the rear. Putnam stood on the step in the glow of the carriage lamp, his right foot still on the stair, his right hand extended to help Madame Duval down. He was smiling. He believed the danger had passed. The strike came from behind. The iron hook hit his head with force. He staggered. Foster struck again. Putnam collapsed. Foster dropped the hook onto the pavement and ran into the night along Broadway. Madame Duval cried out for help. She turned toward the driver, but he lashed the horses and sent the streetcar racing down Broadway, as if fleeing the scene himself. Passers-by rushed to Putnam. The police were summoned. His injuries were too severe for him to survive. Authorities moved quickly. That same night, both the driver and the conductor were detained. Under questioning, they identified William Foster as the man involved. At 3 a.m, officers knocked on his door. He did not resist and admitted his role. He was taken to the Tombs, the gray jail in Lower Manhattan, known for its Egyptian-style facade. There, he awaited court proceedings. The trial began on May 22, 1871, less than a month after the incident. The defense faced serious challenges. Several eyewitnesses had seen the attack. Foster had admitted his involvement. The strategy focused on reducing the severity of the outcome. 2 arguments were presented. First, Foster had been too intoxicated to fully understand his actions. Second, he had a wife and children and therefore deserved leniency. The prosecution rejected both claims. Foster lived on 22nd Street, yet he remained aboard the streetcar 24 blocks past his stop. 4 stops before 46th Street, he had asked whether a car hook was available. When the driver tried to restrain him, Foster threatened him. He then followed Putnam off the car. This suggested forethought rather than random behavior. On May 25th, the jury retired. The following morning, they returned a verdict of guilty in the most serious category, accompanied by a recommendation for mercy. That addition would become important. A date was set for the carrying out of the sentence. Appeals followed and failed. A new date was later established. As it approached, public sentiment shifted. Clergy across denominations delivered sermons opposing capital punishment. Editorial pages filled with appeals. Governor John Adams Dix received petitions from across the country. Many who had never heard Putnam's name now pleaded for mercy for Foster. 7 of the 12 jurors signed a petition urging commutation. They explained that they had agreed to the verdict only because it included a recommendation for clemency. They believed the governor would consider it carefully. Public opinion was sharply divided. Letters to newspapers were evenly split. More than 10 merchants from Pearl Street petitioned the governor to enforce the court's decision. New York was divided. For some, the case became a platform for challenging capital punishment. For others, leniency would diminish the memory of a man who had intervened to protect 2 women. Then money entered the picture, and the situation grew more complicated. Madame Duval stated that 3 separate individuals approached her, encouraging her to support clemency. One suggested it would be in her interest and that compensation might follow. Another warned that Foster had wealthy and influential supporters and implied long-term consequences if the sentence were carried out. She refused them all. Meanwhile, Putnam's widow, Ellen, who had received $5,000 in a civil suit against the streetcar company, wrote Governor Dix requesting that Foster's sentence be reduced. A relative later suggested she had done so for financial reasons. Newspapers amplified the claim. Ellen, now living in Providence, Rhode Island, denied receiving any money. The relative later denied making the accusation. The full truth was never clearly established. Governor Dix postponed the carrying out of the sentence by 2 weeks. Crowds gathered outside the tombs, speculating about a reprieve or pardon. Neither came. After reviewing the case, Dix determined there were no grounds to change the court's decision. On the morning of March 21, 1873, before roughly 300 witnesses in the yard of the tombs, William Foster stepped onto the scaffold. The sentence was carried out according to law. Nearly 2 years after that April night, the car hook tragedy reached its conclusion. Avery Putnam faded into memory as the victim, his passing fueling debates in which his own name gradually receded. Madame Duval and Jenny endured not only trauma, but threats and attempted bribery. They did not bend. Ellen Putnam lived under a cloud of suspicion she could never fully dispel. Yet the Foster case was only one of many that unsettled New York in those uneasy years. While newspapers were still printing reports about the carrying out of the sentence in the yard of the Tombs, another story was unfolding upstate. At first it was quiet, almost invisible. There was no crowded streetcar, no line of horrified witnesses, only an oat field, August heat, and human remains no one was in a hurry to find. August 7th, 1873, Watervliet, New York. A farmhand crossing an oat field near a ravine stopped short. Something lay among the stalks. A man, or what remained of one. The body had been exposed to the August sun for days. Decomposition had nearly erased the face. Identification seemed impossible. Beside the body lay a razor. The coroner surveyed the scene and initially leaned toward what appeared to be the obvious explanation. An isolated field, a razor, no witnesses. It suggested self-inflicted harm. Then he examined the remains more closely. In addition to a deep cut across the throat, there were 9 gunshot wounds to the head and chest. 9. No documented case of self-harm had ever involved 9 separate gunshots. This was not self-inflicted. It was a deliberate act of lethal violence, arranged to resemble something else. No papers were found. No personal belongings capable of identifying the man. Only one clue. A business card from a Brooklyn barber shop tucked into a pocket nearly 150 miles south of the oat field. It read, Theodore Grunewald, barber and hairdresser, 35 Atlantic Street, South Brooklyn. Detectives traveled to Brooklyn. At Grunewald's shop, they learned something significant. On August 5th, 2 days before the remains were discovered, an employee named Emil Lowenstein had arrived early, silently gathered his tools, and left without explanation. He never returned. Officers then visited his residence. It was a 2-family house. The upper apartment belonged to the Lowensteins. The lower was occupied by John D. Weston and his wife. Mrs. Weston answered the door in tears. Her husband was missing as well. On the morning of August 5th, he had left carrying a small satchel he had recently purchased. He placed $20 on the mantel and told her, "Here's money for breakfast." He did not return. John Weston was a Civil War veteran who had lost an arm during the conflict, an amputee, a badly decomposed body in a field. No identification. Mrs. Weston added more. When her husband failed to come home, she checked their bank accounts. On August 4th, the day before he vanished, he had withdrawn every dollar from 2 accounts. The total was $458. She also recalled an unusual exchange. Shortly before disappearing, Weston had returned from a walk with Lowenstein. Upon entering the room, Weston took him by the hand and said, "Remember, Emil." Lowenstein replied, "Yes." The next morning, both men were gone. Investigators traced their likely route. On August 5th, Lowenstein and Weston appear to have boarded the Harlem Railroad, transferred at Chatham, and arrived in Albany around 5 in the afternoon. From there, they continued to Watervliet. Authorities concluded that it was there that John D. Weston lost his life. The motive appeared straightforward: money. Weston had withdrawn his entire savings the day before. Why he carried it, and for what purpose, remained unclear. Perhaps a joint venture had gone wrong. Perhaps the situation had been planned from the beginning. The investigation could not fully answer that question. The financial incentive, however, was difficult to ignore. Emil Lowenstein was 23, a barber, and the son of a Prussian Jewish family that had emigrated when he was still a boy. His past raised concerns. Years earlier in Philadelphia, he had served time in Moyamensing prison. His family had since distanced themselves from him. He moved from city to city, earning a living through his trade. His defense attorney would later describe him as an Ishmael of sorts, wandering the country with his craft. At Grunewald's shop, he wore a worn coat and often borrowed small change for car fare. He was consistently short of funds. Then, on August 6th, the day after he and Weston disappeared from Brooklyn, Lowenstein returned home. He began spending money, new furniture, new clothes and jewelry for himself and his wife, a down payment on his own barbershop in Manhattan. Before establishing this new venture, he asked his wife for assistance. He told her Weston had left him 2 revolvers and that one needed to be disposed of. She complied, dropping the weapon into the water during a ferry crossing from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Soon afterward, Mrs. Lowenstein opened a newspaper. An unidentified one-armed man had been discovered in an oat field near Watervliet. She connected the details: the disappearance, the sudden access to money, the revolver at the bottom of the river. She confronted her husband directly. Lowenstein denied any involvement, but he understood the seriousness of the situation. He chose to leave for Canada, believing he would be beyond immediate reach there. He urged his wife not to follow right away. He would settle first and send for her. She refused to accept his money, but agreed to join him once he wrote. The letter arrived. Police discovered it first. During a search of the apartment, detectives found an envelope addressed to Hannah Davidson, Mrs. Lowenstein's maiden name. It was postmarked St. Catharines, Ontario. In St. Catharines, Lowenstein was working in a local barber shop. Detectives located his tools, a set of 6 razors marked with the initial L and numbered 1 through 6. The razor found beside the body in Watervliet bore a similar marking, the letter L and the number 7. Lowenstein was arrested and returned to New York to stand trial. The trial opened on January 26, 1874. Lowenstein maintained that he was not responsible. He claimed that on August 5th he had traveled not to Watervliet, but to Philadelphia to visit his father. The money he spent upon returning, he said, was not stolen. Years earlier, during a journey to California, he had earned a substantial sum and concealed it behind a projecting stone in the wall of Moyamensing prison. On this visit, he retrieved it. The defense did not rely heavily on that explanation. Instead, counsel emphasized that the case was entirely circumstantial. There were no eyewitnesses. The remains were so decomposed that, they argued, even identifying them conclusively as Weston was uncertain. The defense attorney spoke for 5 hours, repeatedly stressing one principle. The state had to demonstrate that no one other than Lowenstein could have committed the act. According to the defense, that threshold had not been met. The jury retired. They returned in 7 minutes. Guilty in the highest degree. The court imposed capital punishment by hanging. There were no formal appeals. A petition requesting leniency was submitted to Governor John Adams Dix, the same governor who had previously declined clemency in the Foster case. He declined again. The sentence was scheduled for April 10, 1874. In prison, Lowenstein converted to Catholicism. On the day the sentence was carried out, A priest stood beside him as he knelt and kissed a crucifix. He then addressed the witnesses. "I wish to say that I am innocent of the act for which I stand here. I have been sentenced, and I am prepared to face it. But I do so innocent. The time will come when this will be shown, perhaps soon, perhaps later. If I were guilty, I would not deny it. I do not wish to leave this world with a falsehood on my lips. I call upon God as witness to my innocence. I am as innocent as a newborn child." At that time, New York used a gallows mechanism involving a heavy counterweight that lifted the body upward sharply. The procedure was swift. Medical officials later confirmed the end of life. He was buried at St. Mary's Cemetery on Washington Avenue in Albany. Whether he was truly responsible remains uncertain. No one could say with absolute certainty. Perhaps only Emil Lowenstein himself knew the full truth. Lowenstein went to his grave without admitting guilt. Whatever truth he carried, if there was one, went with him. History, however, offers many cases in which a fatal act grows not from mystery or careful design, but from something far more ordinary. That is what occurred in August of 1870, 3 years before the remains in the oat field were discovered. The Ware family home stood 3 miles outside the town of Berlin, New Jersey. It was a modest structure of 4 rooms, a patch of land, and walls too thin to contain what unfolded within. The head of the household, John A. Ware, was a man of violent temper and domineering habits. He berated his wife at every opportunity, threatened her with bodily harm, and appeared to take satisfaction in her fear. Louisa Ware endured it. She endured not only because she was physically smaller or frightened, but because the law of the 1870s offered her little refuge. In most American states, a husband exercised near total authority over his wife. Moderate correction of a spouse was widely tolerated in practice, and a married woman seeking protection in court rarely found it. Louisa was confined not merely by circumstance, but by statute. Their daughter, Patience, lived under the same roof with her husband and infant child. She sided with her father. Their son, 23-year-old John S. Ware, consistently defended his mother. Also residing in the house was a boarder, Mary Ann White, known by her married name Champion, separated from her husband. John A. Ware had invited her to stay, ostensibly as a companion for Louisa. Louisa resented the arrangement. Mary Ann tried to remain neutral in the household quarrels, yet she was visibly aligned with the master of the house. That alone was enough to deepen tensions. It was less a home than a vessel under pressure. Neighbors spoke cautiously of young John S. Ware. They described him as simple or weak-minded. He had never attended school, could neither read nor write, and had inherited much of his father's volatility. 4 years earlier, he had married a woman named Prudence Simpkins, but they no longer lived together. Rumors of harsh treatment followed him. Twice he had attempted to take his own life. Once he walked into the woods with a rope. On another occasion, he swallowed 2 bottles of laudanum and survived only by chance. He was a man at the edge, living in a household long past its breaking point. Morning, August 16th, 1870. John A. Ware rose early and demanded breakfast. From the doorway, he called to his wife, addressing her with open contempt. Louisa came downstairs. He ordered her to strain the milk. He wanted pancakes, but there was no flour in the house. Irritated, he set out for the home of a neighbor, Mrs. Pearson, to purchase some. While he was gone, Patience entered the kitchen. She saw her mother straining milk into a bowl. and declared the bowl to be hers. She demanded the milk be poured out at once. If Louisa refused, she said she would throw it into the yard herself. A bowl of milk. That was the beginning. John S. Ware entered and sided with his mother. A quarrel erupted between brother and sister. It appeared to be a continuation of an earlier dispute. Words escalated into blows. John struck Patience. Her husband, George Williams, intervened. He rushed at John, and the two struggled. Williams broke free, gathered his wife and child, and pulled them from the house. As he left, he shouted that he would bring charges. John seized several bricks and hurled them after the departing family. Then he ran inside, took his father's loaded fowling piece from the wall, and discharged it in their direction as they fled. John A. Ware was returning home with flour in hand. On the road, Mrs. Pearson reportedly told him that Louisa had recently purchased poison from her. Whether this was gossip, misunderstanding, or invention remains unclear. John accepted it as fact. He entered the house already in a fury. He accused his wife of plotting to poison him. From there, he moved to accusations of infidelity. In his hand, he carried an iron bolt nearly 2 feet long. He lifted it and threatened to split her skull. Louisa ran from the house in tears, as she had done many times before. On earlier occasions, the storm had passed. On this day, it would not. John S. Ware watched. He reloaded the gun. He stepped outside and found his father. John A. Ware saw the weapon leveled at him. "Are you going to fire on your own father?" he asked. "Yes," the son replied, "if you will not give me money." The father attempted to delay him. He said he would provide money after the son chopped wood. John S. Ware pulled the trigger. The charge struck his father in the chest. John A. Ware fell. The son ran. Then he stopped, turned back, rolled the body over, searched the pockets, and removed the wallet. After that, he left the scene. The motives in this case resist simple explanation. Money was certainly involved. So were years of witnessing his mother's degradation at a time when neither law nor custom offered her escape. There was inherited rage. There was instability. There may have been something else that John S. Ware himself could never fully articulate. News of the slaying spread quickly through the county. John S. Ware was apprehended by a county constable as he attempted to board a ferry in Camden, New Jersey. He offered no serious resistance. During questioning, he admitted to the shooting. His explanation was plain. He said he acted because of the way his father treated his mother. The trial commenced on January 25, 1871. Each member of the family took the stand. Their divisions unfolded before the court. The prosecution sought to establish deliberation. A key witness was Charles Harper, an orphaned grandson of the deceased who had lived in the household. Harper testified that days earlier, John had declared that if his father refused him money, he would shoot him. Mary Ann Champion stated that John A. Ware had expressed fear of his son. Shortly before his death, he had given her a wallet containing $100, instructing that the sum go to Patience should anything happen to him. She added that her own husband later appropriated half the money. The defense attacked the credibility of these witnesses. They claimed Harper had been influenced by promises of lodging and support. Lemuel Champion, Mary Ann's husband, contradicted her account. He insisted there had been no such wallet and that the money was discovered only after John A. Ware's death. The court excluded Lemuel's testimony. Under the prevailing doctrine, spouses were generally barred from testifying against one another. The same legal structure that had long failed to shield Louisa Ware now silenced an inconvenient witness. The defense's principal argument was mental incapacity. All agreed that John was intellectually limited. His prior attempts at self-destruction were presented as evidence of disordered reason. Several physicians testified that his conduct suggested instability rather than calculated intent. The jury was unconvinced. They returned a verdict of guilty in the highest degree. The conviction was overturned on procedural grounds. The exclusion of Lemuel Champion's testimony was deemed improper. A second trial began in October 1871. The same witnesses appeared. The same contradictions resurfaced. The same debate over sanity unfolded. The result did not change. Guilty in the first degree. The court imposed the capital sentence. It was scheduled for December 15th. In the condemned cell, clergymen visited John Ware. His wife came as well. All urged him to repent and make peace with God. He refused. Sheriff Fredericks, charged with carrying out the sentence, was deeply troubled. "Promise me you will repent," he said. "I cannot bear to see you go without it." "I promise that I will not," John answered firmly. At 11:18 in the morning, Sheriff Fredericks released the mechanism. A heavy counterweight dropped, snapping the rope upward with force. John S. Ware's neck broke instantly. Physicians later certified that life was extinct. Before that day, however, John had made an unusual arrangement. He had negotiated for his body to be delivered to Professor Duffy of Philadelphia University. Duffy was engaged in experiments that hovered between science and speculation. He sought to determine whether a person might be restored immediately after apparent death through electricity and other resuscitative methods. Such ideas were not fantasy in that era. Since Luigi Galvani's demonstrations in the 18th century, electricity had been shown to animate the muscles of the dead. Some believed the boundary between life and death might not be absolute. John S. Ware, an illiterate farmer's son, had somehow learned of these theories and volunteered himself as a subject. He calculated that only minutes would separate his sentence from the proposed experiment. His wife objected. The sheriff deferred to her wishes. The body was released to the family and carried to Berlin Crossroads. There, John S. Ware was buried without confession, without reconciliation, and without resurrection. The house 3 miles from town stood empty. The milk bowl remained.